1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whispers of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never it's who I am. Oh, I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers only you provide. And you know just what we need before we say a word. You're good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Oh, it's love so undeniable. I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable. I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love, love. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. How great the chasm that lay between us. How high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into life. And through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The Jesus Christ, my living hope. Could imagine so great a mercy, what heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who sets me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who sets me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your very body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your very body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the victory. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Jesus Christ, my living hope. God, you are my living hope.
Grace, what have you done? Murdered for me on that cross, accused in absence of wrong, my sin washed away in your blood. Too much to make sense of it all. I know that your love breaks my fall. The scandal of grace, you soul will live. Oh, to be like you, give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart. Death, where is your sting? Powers of death is my sin. The cross has taught me to live, and mercy my heart now to sing. The day and its troubles shall come. I know that your strength is enough. The scandal of grace, you died in my place, so my soul will live. Oh, to be like you, give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart. Oh, to be like you, give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart. All because of you, Jesus, it's all because of you, Jesus, it's all because of your love that my soul will live.
Sing that.
And it's all because of you, Jesus, it's all because of you, Jesus, it's all because of your love that my soul will live. Oh, to be like you, give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart. Oh, to be like you, and give all I have just to know you. Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you.
in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken.
Thank you, Lord.
I normally get to talk to the children's church kids. I normally leave about this time and go hang out with them. They're a better audience than you guys, probably. No offense. They ask such cool questions. That's the thing. They ask good questions, and they're also very straight up with you. They tell you, they kind of tell you what they're thinking. So that can be good, and it can be bad. But anyways, if you go ahead and open your Bibles to 1 Samuel 17, that's where we're going to be today. Looking at a pretty familiar story of David and Goliath, one we've heard countless times throughout our lives. I'm sure if you spent any time near the church or even outside of the church, it's become part of our language, part of our cultural vernacular to even use it as sort of a metaphor for the underdog. You hear it all over the place, but I want to talk to you guys today about how when we look at its biblical context, we look at its historical context, I think we can find that perhaps our account of the story of David and Goliath isn't necessarily the Bible's account. Perhaps the story we know about David and Goliath is a little bit misperceived, or we have some things a little bit blurry in our picture. So I want to sort of tackle those misconceptions this morning, and I also just want to point out that this story is not here by accident. Nothing in the Old Testament, none of these narratives are here by accident. They're all here for a very specific reason. Remember, this book isn't what happened, right? It's a book about what happened. An author put this here for you to read it as a follower of Jesus, to look back to see how this would lead to Jesus as he is the center of all history. But I'm going to start with a story. I really love sports. With college football back, I've sort of fallen in love all over again with sports. Every Saturday, just watching all the games. Yesterday was not a great day for me. South Carolina lost, got thumped pretty bad. CSU lost, so it wasn't great. But I do love sports. I've always really enjoyed them. And to me, the reason I really love sports is because they create these magnificent narratives that are kind of larger than life that we can't really get anywhere else. For instance, we can get these battles of good versus evil, of youth versus experience, the flashy player versus the gritty hard worker, and of course, the greatest story of all, the story we most love to hear in sports, is the underdog story. Right? I can't help but be reminded of a few of the most famous underdog stories throughout history. One comes to mind is The Miracle on the Ice, which I only know from the Kurt Russell movie because it happened 20 years before I was born. But who here watched The Miracle on the Ice? Anyone in here? You guys are so old. But The Miracle on the Ice, a group of college kids from the United States who didn't really know what they were doing had, scored late in the third period 2 unlikely goals that led them over a monumentous victory against the old veteran Russians. A more recent example that happened in my lifetime, the 2018 Super Bowl, it was just so beautiful. Backup Nick Foles, a man of God, I will point out, catching the ball in the legendary Philly special late in the second quarter, leading his team to victory over the New England Patriots. Such a beautiful underdog story. And I, in fact, if you guys will bear with me, I, in fact, have an underdog story of my own this morning. It starts out in about the 4th grade. I decided at this point, I wasn't going to be, I'd gone from astronaut to doctor, and I decided I was going to be an NBA basketball player. I knew that was what God had called me to do, and I said, God, I'm willing to go serve you in the NBA. I know you need people there. Here am I, send me. I'm willing to make millions of dollars to throw a ball at a little hoop for the rest of my life. And I'm ready to answer the call. I'm here for it. Around the 8th grade, though, reality started to set in, and I figured out that for a few different reasons that are probably obvious to you guys, it was not going to work out. The NBA is a hard job market to crack into, believe it or not. And I realized, it wasn't in the cards for me. But I still loved basketball. And I played basketball all through high school, and it was a big part of my life. And my senior year, I'd actually become the captain of my basketball team. Now, before you're like, ooh, our team was horrible. We were so bad. No, listen, like, however bad you think it is, it's worse. I was a senior, and my buddy Christopher was a senior, and then we had one guy who was a sophomore. He didn't look like a sophomore, though. And then we had 12 freshmen, or younger. I don't even, some 8th graders in there. We were not very good. Luckily, one of our freshmen was having a good year. He was shooting the ball super well. He was really small, but he was able to kind of use what God had given him to get us into a position to maybe find the victory. And then, we kind of scraped by, and we made it into playoff contention, right? We had to go to an away gym. In our last game, we're up by a few points, and the little guy, he's normally a shooter. He tries to drive to the rim, and just a full-grown man just hits him into the ground. And gave him a concussion. So he's concussed. And we're left with 11 not good freshmen, 2 seniors, also not very good, and our sophomore. So things are bad. And I remember a few days before we were supposed to drive to play this team. And let me point out, the team we were going to play, they were good, okay? This team they had it together. They were full-grown men, beards, tattoos. I mean, we had like 12 guys who looked 14. They had 12 guys who looked like they had 401ks. It was ridiculous. And we were supposed to go play them, and without our best player. And I remember a few days before the game, my coach, he's calling me in his office. He sat me down. He said, John, he called me John. He said, John, as a captain of this team, I'm going to let you make this call. With our best scorer out with a concussion, and this game's 4 hours away. And I mean, last time we played them, they beat us by like 35. I just want to, what a coach, right? I was like, yeah, I know, I know all this. He was like, but we could just not travel. We could just have like a fun night here, hang out as a team, and just and forfeit. And I remember kind of looking at him and thinking for a second, and probably the wisest moment of my whole high school career. I even asked him about this later, and I said, did I really say that? Because that doesn't seem like something I would have said. But I said, what are we kind of teaching those guys about life if we don't go play, though? Because we've told them all year it's not all about winning, right? It's mainly about winning, but it's not all about winning. And so I said we're kind of cheating them out of something if we don't go play the game. And so I said we should just go play, and if we get beat, we get beat. But these younger guys will get some experience, if nothing less. It's the kind of pragmatic view. They get some good game time against some tough opponents. That's always valuable in sports. But I remember we drove all the way there. We're getting hyped up as bad teams normally do. And we're getting into it, and we're like, we can do this, And I remember getting in the locker room and hearing the speech that I'm sure, if any of you have played sports and been bad at them, you have heard this before. We go in, and the coach comes in, and he pulls out 1 Samuel 17. He's walking back and forth. It's a Christian school. He's walking back and forth, and he's got the Bible, and he starts telling this story about how, there was this giant. He was this apex warrior in this huge armor and this sword and this spear, and he's just like fit to kill. Obviously the other team. And then and then we're over here with this shepherd boy. We're scrawny. We're, and actually literally like 14 or 15 years old, and we don't really have the weapons or the tools to get this done, but somehow, maybe, the stars will align and God will show favor to us more so than this other Christian school that I'm sure is also thinking God will show favor on them, and he'll bless us, and we'll go in here and we'll get the victory. So, I left that locker room probably more fired up than I've ever been in my life. I was excited. I was ready to play. I was a senior, and I was just, get on my back. We're going all the way. We're about to bring home the victory. We're going to the playoffs. This is just the beginning. So the game got out of hand very fast. We were down by 15 with probably a minute or two past. It was bad. But what if I told you things started to turn around? What if I told you that I hit some shots, and Chris hit some shots, and my boy Michael hit some shots, and my boy Josh and my boy Samuel, they were hitting shots at left and right, and we were scoring the ball. And when it came down to it, we won that game. I'm totally kidding. We lost by like 60 points. Our shooting percentage was so low that it was like in the teens. If you don't know a lot about basketball, that just sounds bad. Like that, it was rough. We were so unequipped for this battle. We lost miserably. You see, we just weren't on their level. They were bigger than us. They were faster than us. They were smarter than us. Probably also blessed by God. And by far, they were more prepared than we were. They were older, and you could see that they had equipped themselves to win the battle. They built a team that could get the job done. So as we turn our attention today to God's Word, I want to make the claim that the idea we have about David in this story, like I said, is not necessarily the idea the Bible has given us. I want you to understand that David was never an underdog. In fact, David was a probable victor. His win percentage going into this made him the likely favorite the entire time. So I want to go ahead and give you 3 reasons why I believe David was always a heavy favorite in the fight. If we look at verse 1 and 2, now the Philistines gathered their army for battle, and they were gathered at Soka, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soka and Azekah in Ephidammim. It's a hard word. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. So Philistines and Israelites were scurrying off in a geographical region known as the Shephelah. Okay, so the way ancient Israel, ancient Palestine is set up, still like this today, along its eastern border, which I guess would be this side for you guys, is a mountain range, right? And that's where all the famous cities we know of ancient Israel were. Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Aaron, all the cities of that day. Adjacent to the mountain range is a coastal plain against the Mediterranean Sea. And connecting these 2 regions is the Shephelah. So the Shephelah is a series of valleys that run east to west. And here the Philistines, like many armies before, had challenged the Israelites and challenged the people holding this stronghold in this mountain by going up into the valleys, into the mountains, trying to find a valley to where they could split the enemy in half. If you know anything about warfare, if you can split your enemy, divide their forces, even if you have less men, you'll be a larger threat. And your chances of victory will radically increase. So Saul's men weren't, as the story kind of depicts them, I just want you guys to know, they weren't chumps. They knew what was going on. They had an idea of this, and so they went down into the valley of Elah to fight against the Philistines. So the Israelites dig in along the northern ridge of the valley of Elah, and the Philistines dig in against the southern ridge of the valley of Elah, and there's a standoff. Because if you're fighting on 2 sides of a valley, you kind of have a big problem. Because to get to the other side, you have to run down the valley and back up, which takes a while and leaves you exposed the whole time. So neither army wanted to risk the massive losses that would be brought on by exposing themselves by running over the ridge. So the Philistines, as we know, they decide to practice in the ancient warfare technique that we know as single combat. This idea is ludicrous to me. I don't know why anyone would ever do this. It seems dumb. I guess that's why we don't use it anymore. But how it works is you send your best warrior, often your leader, your king, and if he could beat the other warrior or king that you send forward, then you win. That's it. There's no war needed. Either the other army of guys will retreat, or they will, forfeit. They will come subject to your army, as was the case here. So if we look down in verses 3 through 7, we're kind of given the idea of what they're up against here in this champion. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and the Israel stood on the mountain on the other side of the valley between them. And there came out of the camp of Philistine a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Very large. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, and he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. So most of us are pretty familiar with this part of the story. It's very true. Goliath was fit to kill. He was totally prepared for hand-to-hand combat. He was fierce, daunting, and his armor to the Israelites, who at this time would have had a much lighter armor would have been what would seem as almost insurpassable. They would think that an opponent like this would be extremely hard to defeat. And so we get the picture of fear that the Israelites have in this chapter. Down in verse 11, we see, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed, and they were greatly afraid. They didn't think they had a champion who could beat this guy in hand-to-hand combat, and they didn't. They didn't have a champion who could beat this guy in hand-to-hand combat. But that's because they were looking at things the wrong way. So at this point, we've got this guy, this huge, mighty warrior, down in the valley floor, and he's like, bring it on. Again, I don't know why they agreed to this, but he's like, bring it on. Let's have it out like men down here in this valley. And then we get our shepherd boy who arrives on the scene. So it's so easy to picture David in this chapter. He's such a little meek, scrawny fellow, much like the freshman probably on my basketball team. Kind of looks kind of lanky and weird in his jersey. He should probably have an undershirt on or something. And he's only even on the battlefield, as the chapter tells us, to deliver bread and cheese, right? His dad was like, yo, your brothers are out there, they're tired, they're fighting, you gotta get them some food. He is like legitimately the Bible's version of a water boy, okay? He's not even on the team. He's like just this young kid who's just wants to hang out with the team and wants to go on trips with the team, but he hasn't really been trusted with a position yet to do anything legitimate. But we hear that when David arrives on the scene, he's inquisitive. He's kind of like, what's going on? Like I'm kind of I'm interested in what this guy has to say. And as we look, and he keeps asking. He says, in verse 27 or 26, and David said to the man who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?" David doesn't think this is a ridiculous idea at all. He's like, "Hey, what? Is someone trying to go kill this guy right now, or what's going on?" And he actually asked multiple people. He's trying to figure it out. He's like, "Why is no one going down to fight this guy?" It's almost like he knows something they don't know, right? He's kind of got this piece of information. That he's like, "Yeah, I mean, I don't understand what the big deal is." Almost is kind of the tone you hear from David here, and then. The words that David spoke, as we see in verses 31 through 33, the words that David spoke were heard. They were repeated before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistines." Okay, so this little kid comes up to Saul, the king, and he's like, "Stop being afraid, bro. I got this. I'll be the warrior. I'll fight for you." And Saul's like, "Not a chance, right? There's no way." He said to David, "You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you're but a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth." I love that. He's saying, "You're just a kid." When this guy was a kid, he was a warrior, right? He was already a warrior. What's so ironic here, though, is Saul is describing David when he says this. But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And then there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock. And I went after him and struck him and delivered him out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him." What? Did you just read that? He was killing lions and bears, plural of both. He killed multiple lions and bears. Some scholars have disagreed and said, maybe it was wolves. He killed wolves and beasts with his hands. And listen to this. He didn't just kill them. He chased after them. They took sheep and he went sprinting after them and went down, tracked them down, and killed them. That is a beastly thing to do. My brother and my dad are up in Alaska, if you didn't know. Why I'm here. My brother spent a lot of time in Alaska, lived up there for a little while, and spent this summer kind of in the Alaskan wilderness fishing. And he's had some square-offs with bears, okay? He's had some bears stand up on their hind legs and growl at him. And he's just told me there is nothing more scary than having that type of predator look you down and show you that they're dominant over you, right? These beasts, they're warriors that I would say are probably greater than any man, right? They were created to be apex predators over the entire food chain, to be literally built to hunt and to kill. And David is chasing these guys down. So it's as if Saul heard this and was like, that is a pretty good resume. Like, before when I first saw you, I didn't think you really had a chance. But, I mean, you've taken down lions and you've taken down bears. I mean, you might be the most qualified person to do this job. And he even says, your servant is starting on both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine should be like one of them. So Saul has the idea, like, okay, like you already have done this before, and this Philistine is just going to be just another target for you, okay? So up to this point, Saul's like, I'm not going to stop you. And up to this point, David looks like a serious underdog, right? And then we get, even in verses 39, they're preparing him to go out, 39 and 40. We see, and David strapped his sword over his arm, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. It was almost like he couldn't even walk in them. He was like, this doesn't work for me. Like, this is too big. And when I was growing up, I always got this idea that David was like, he would kind of strap this stuff on and be like, I would love to wear this. Like, I could really use it. And I don't really know how to fight any other way. Not that I've killed bears and lions before, but I really need this armor and this sword and this spear to make it out of this alive, but it's not going to fit. So I'm just going to have to go, the Lord's going to be my armor today. Like, I'm not going to be able to wear anything else. But see, that's kind of our first misconception. I want you to understand that David was prepared, okay? He was prepared for his moment. Just a little bit of historical context can help us understand that. In ancient combat, there's 3 types of soldiers. There's cavalry, they ride on horses, right? There's infantry, okay? These are guys like Goliath would have been. And there's artillery. And artillery was made up of archers, as we know from movies and stuff. And it was also made up of slingers, okay? David was not someone who was just like, I'm going to fight with a sling. It's not something that anyone has done before, but I'm just going to start doing it. No, that was not the situation at all. As the writer Malcolm Gladwell explains in his book, David and Goliath, when David spun his sling, it would revolve 6 or 7 times per second, okay? That means the rock would have been released around 35 meters per second. That is substantially faster than the fastest major league pitch. This sling wasn't a child's toy. It wasn't something he used for fun. It was a sort of sack-like piece of leather with 2 long strands. And he would hold those strands, and he would spin it, and he would let one go, and it would send either a ball of metal that had been crafted, or in this case, a stone or rock, towards the enemy. More than that, okay, with that in mind, okay, he's got a pretty lethal, devastating weapon. The stones in the Valley of Elah were not normal rocks. They were barium sulfate. That means they had twice the density of a normal stone. If you run the ballistics for the stopping power of this stone through the speed, it matches that of a 45 millimeter handgun. David, literally at his disposal, had something that had the stopping force of a 45 millimeter handgun when it hit a human being. Further, we know historical records, many historical records, have told us that experienced slingers could hit a moving bird from the air. David was prepared, okay? David was well prepared for what he can face. So when he saw the Philistine there, and he looked at him, and he said, what's the prize for killing this guy? Because I know that I can defeat him, and I might not look like it. I might not look like I'm equipped, because I'm not going to go to his ground. I'm not going to go play his game. I'm not going to go put on the heavy armor and try to fight him hand to hand. No, I'm going to go with a whole new strategy, something this giant is not expecting. David was equipped not just to fight, but to win. The Lord had given him everything he needed before he even knew that this trial would ever arise. He was totally prepared. But how? That's a crucial question, I think, for us to ask if we're going to try to apply it to our own lives. How was David prepared? He was prepared through the position of a shepherd boy. Through a position considered unglamorous, a position considered undesirable, lowly, not of much worth. Remember, David was only even ever on this battlefield because he was delivering bread and cheese. He was never thought of as a factor. Listen, I want you to know that you're going to have to go through, and if you're not in one now, I promise you, you will be or you have been, through a position and a time of preparation in your life. And it's going to lead to great victories. I really believe that. But I believe that these positions that we get in, they're not always what we want. And they're not always what we have in mind. And we go dissatisfied, and we go tired, and we go weary of our time as the shepherd. And in these times, God's sending us these trials to prepare us. And he sends us these bears, and he sends us these lions. And oftentimes, we're just like ignoring the bears and lions, and we're complaining about them, and we're saying there's nothing we can do about them. God, I can't face these bears and lions. I'm a shepherd boy. And we have the gall to turn around and say, God, where's my Goliath moment? When can I go defeat a giant? And all the while, we're letting our sheep be carried away and drug away by lions and bears. We're not fulfilling our purpose with what we have now, where we are, in our quiet work, in our work that's not seen by others, and what happens behind closed doors when we're alone, maybe in the work that someone else didn't do or didn't want to do. And these places, when God gives them to us, I just want you to know that on the one hand, yes, these things are just as important to God, right? They're just as important. These offices are just as important. But even further, I want you to know that God is trying to prepare you when you have your Goliath, and you will, okay? All of us are going to face things that are really big, like cancer, and like death, and like divorce, and all these different things. And when we get to them, we're not going to be prepared. And yes, God will be with us. Yes, he will give us his grace. Yes, he will defend us. But he's trying to prepare you right now, right? He's trying to prepare you today. So David was really prepared, right? But David was also, he was willing. If we look back at verse 32, we see that. He says, let no man's heart fail him. Fail because of him. Your servant will go and will fight against the Philistine. We're told in chapter 18, verse 8, after David's already given the whooping to Goliath, that he was successful wherever Saul sent him. Saul was like, whatever I send this kid to do, he does a great job. He was willing to answer the call. When David arrives on the scene, in verse 26, like we already said, we see his inquiry and what can be done about the death of this giant. This little boy delivering this stuff is already interested. He's already willing. He's already on the scene to help out. He's available. He's like, yeah, maybe I could do that. Listen, we're real good at feeling called to the things we want to be called into, right? Imagine if fourth grade me believing that I was going into the NBA and I was, had this life ahead of me that, full of just, fame and fortune. I heard the voice of the Lord just come to me in a dream one night to my fourth grade bedside. And he said, Jonathan, you and my name will go and be a garbage man. I would say, no, God, no, that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and be the NBA player because that's what you want from me. And we're going to just go with that. And as silly as that seems, we do this all the time. We follow Jesus when the gospel benefits us. We follow Jesus when the road is easy. We follow Jesus when there's no cost. We follow Jesus when we're like, maybe this will help me make more money. Or we follow Jesus when we're like, maybe this will help me feel better. Maybe this will bring me some comfort. And I want to submit today that we follow Jesus until he leads us to a giant, right? We follow Jesus, and sometimes... And I'm not talking anymore to the people who just, are fine in the field, just like, whatever. But God brings us to these giants, and that's when we're like, this is enough. This is enough. The gospel is not worth this. It's not helping me, right? You want to know why so much of the news we see people who are great servants of the faith, like great worship leaders and writing songs for Hillsong and different places like this, and great pastors and people who have been faithful servants of the gospel for so many years just totally crumble? It's because they were willing to follow Jesus until they came to a giant. They were never servants of the gospel in the first place. They were never willing to die for Jesus. They were fine living with him as kind of a part of their lives, right? Kind of be like, yeah, that's cool. It's given me a job. It's brought me some notoriety. It's helped me out. But when it comes down to it, when something stops, something hits you, and it gets hard to fall away. They were never perhaps prepared in the first place. Perhaps that's on us as a church. Should we not be making good disciples? Should we not be following in the footsteps of Jesus to prepare the next generation to come up and be faithful servants of Christ? And perhaps that was also, well, not perhaps, for sure, surely it was on them as well, right? They weren't willing when the time came to face what the Lord wanted them to face. Even though Christ had given his life for them, right? We're oftentimes, like I just said, we can say it, and like Josh pointed out so well before I came up here, it's easy to say that stuff, right? It's easy to say it and know it up here, but that's not what Christianity really is. It's the fact that because Christ died for us, we'll die to ourselves to follow him. And a lot of times, we would rather just sit in the pasture and be a shepherd. We would rather not face these things. And like I said, I don't think it really matters if you'd want to or not. The giant's going to come around. But that's just not for us. We're just not ready to take that step. Others of us, like I said, we're willing to go out and fight the giant. Here am I, Lord. Send me. I'm ready to do whatever you need me to do. I'm ready to take center stage. I'm ready to go out and be a champion for you. And we're losing in the small things every day, right? We're losing to those bears and lions. We're caught in sin we just can't get ourselves out of. And that's what we tell ourselves, right? We tell ourselves, there's nothing I can do. I can't get out of this, right? It's too hard. I'm just too stuck. I just keep doing it, and maybe there's just one thing piles onto another and another, and if, in fact, you simply, when you're in a position like this, it's not that you can't get out. It's not that God's not enough. It's that your faith isn't enough to trust God and to trust that his will for your life is better than anything you have, right? You've made these things your idols. You've made these things your idols, and you may be a Christian today, but I want you to understand you are a worthless warrior. You're an absolutely worthless. God, when it comes down to it, he's not going to be able to use you how he's prepared to use you. He's not going to be able to have you fight for him. As 1 Corinthians 3:15 states, we get this image that it's kind of says, he'll enter heaven, but just through the fire. Right? As one of my Bible professors puts it, by the skin of your teeth. We'll enter heaven by the skin of our teeth. And I think a lot of us are there today. We see in David that he was prepared and that he was willing and that he was a perfect vessel for God's mighty power. Right? He was a perfect vessel for use. He'd been made worthy of the master's use because he had been so faithful with the little he had that God, when he gave him much, David was able to rise to that calling, and much did he give him. David would rise, as we all know, to the kingship of all of Israel. As Ephesians 6:10 states, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might, but on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. I think this verse kind of puts this story into perspective in a really beautiful way. Not only being strong in the Lord, depending on what he will do for you, caring for you, and preserving you through your battle, but working with God to put on the whole armor that he has available for you. Trusting him every day. Sanctification, growing more holy, is working with God through his grace, right? For these big words, vivification, mortification, trying to be more like him and putting the old things to death. It's not, I want you to understand, most things, it's like heresy, most things in the gospel are all Jesus, right? We got to just get out of the way of those things, right? And I hope you understand that. Sanctification is not one of them. This is a joint effort between you and God. He will, by his grace, lift you to this place, but you have to be disciplined, you have to work, and you have to be a good disciple, a good follower of Jesus. Not that your salvation is works-based, we know that you'll enter heaven, but to be a good warrior, to be someone who's willing who's willing and able to fight the giant. That's what it takes. The third and final point I want to make today as I'm wrapping up is that the giant, he wasn't really all he seemed. And if we look at verse 8, If you guys will look at verse 8 for me. I'm sorry, I'm using my phone. I felt super old when I got up here because I was going to use my paper Bible since I didn't have to scroll like crazy, but the words were too small. I was like, how could anyone see this? And so I guess I got to follow in the footsteps of our older brethren and get some large print. And glasses, yeah. Yeah, one of the two, or both. Both. It's so bad. So we see this picture of the giant. He's standing he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. He says, "Why have you come out to draw up for the battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me." Come down here is, I think, the part I want you guys to focus on. Because as I've said previously, Goliath was pretty worthless outside of combat unless his opponent would come right up to him, right? He needed him to come toe-to-toe with him, and that was the only sort of fighting Goliath would be good at, right? Against David, he would be rendered nearly useless. And his armor, that was, as we heard, is hundreds and hundreds of pounds, would have become an immense burden on him. I think a lot of times the giants of our life look very scary because of how little trust we have in God, little faith. And I think a lot of times we don't really even trust the abilities God has given us, right? We don't trust that if God has called us somewhere, that he's going to be faithful to use us there, right? Despite of our shortcomings. And I think there's such a beautiful picture of that here as we see this giant that to these other men just looks like just unbeatable is actually kind of shrouded in this weakness. We're also told in verse 7, same verse, at the end, that his shield bearer went before him. So this is a little bit of speculation, and feel free to disagree with me. But if anyone in here is an ancient warfare aficionado, but in ancient warfare, not that I am, but I've read too much about it. In ancient warfare, the opponent in single combat sometimes would have someone to go with them, right? Someone to come with them. But it was extremely rare for someone to be led onto the battlefield. A warrior led? Someone who would shout taunts, being almost, the image here is almost ushered onto the battlefield. There's a lot of speculation to why this might be, but I just want, and people have gone very kind of, and starting in kind of the 1970s, the kind of Christian scientific field. And I want you guys to hear this really quickly. A side note, some of my young adult people are here, and I'm so thankful they haven't texted me or anything during the service. I figured that would happen. They would send me GIFs or something. I have little faith in them. It's horrible. But no, one thing we've talked about and kind of brought up is that your reading of the Scripture, it's okay that your reading of the Scripture is influenced by scientific research, by historical context. Because guess what? If you let that happen, you'll soon find that the Bible influences science, that the Bible influences history. And you get this beautiful circle where you can start to connect and really, really kind of sink into the fact, what I believe is the truth of everything, right? And so we can really kind of bring these pictures together. But the scientific community has studied a lot about who Goliath might have been, and looking at the giants, the kind of hereditary giantism that he was a part of. It was not normal how large he was. I think that's kind of easy to see. But the idea was, just as it is today, that almost all giants, people that suffer from giantism, would have bad eyesight. Right? Incredibly strong, incredibly big, maybe a little awkward, but bad eyesight, right? And we get even another picture of this. A lot of scholars will say that it's funny that Goliath says, you bring sticks to me like I'm a dog. David would have had one stick, right? This is someone who very well may not have even been able to see very good, right? That's why he said, come to me, right? Come to me so that I can see you, so I can fight you. All of this, of course, just alludes to the fact that the giant simply wasn't ready for what David had. And listen, I don't want you to go from here today and say, Jonathan preached about how God wasn't really involved in the story of David and Goliath. It wasn't really a miracle at all, and that it can all be explained. That's not it at all. That couldn't be further from the truth. I want you to understand that God was always working in this story, right? It wasn't that a shepherd boy came up and did something completely improbable. It was that throughout this narrative, we see God is in control of every aspect. And today, I want you to understand that he's in control of every aspect of your life. This passage reminds us that God places our feet above the specific stones that we will need. It reminds us that even in our small day-to-day errands like running bread and cheese, he's going to place us in positions to do unbelievable things for the gospel and for the people of God. And perhaps greatly it reminds us that the giants of this life aren't worth being called giants at all. You are never an underdog. I want you to understand that today. You are never an underdog. You carry with you the incredible power of Jesus Christ. He is hidden in you. And one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. No one will get the option of whether to accept Christ or not, because he is the master, he is the Lord, he is Alpha and Omega, he is the beginning and the end, he is over all, he is above all, he is transcendent of everything we could ever know, and I want you to understand that he is in you today. And I know that's easy to know here, but I want you to know that in your heart, and I want you to know that as you go out from here today, and you're facing either over here and you're in the quiet grind of your everyday, and you're facing things that aren't really glamorous, they're just work, and no one's really praising you, there's not an army behind you to tell you how good you're doing. I want you to know that God is with you in those moments. He's using those moments to help his people and to prepare you for when you're over here, for when the storm hits, for when there's a giant, for when there's an opportunity for you to either crumble and look like you're shuddering in your armor back against the lines, like the gospel in you is not powerful enough, or there's the chance that God, he's prepared you and he's given you the abilities and you are now able to face this giant with the unbridled power of the gospel. One quote I throw out a lot, if you hang out with me enough, you'll hear me say this because I talk about it all the time, and I'll kind of close with this. Spurgeon used to always say about apologetics, I study apologetics, it's my minor in school. Spurgeon used to always say about the gospel, about the power of the gospel. He said, how do you defend it? Like a lion, you get out of its way. So I just want you guys to know that today, as we're closing up, you have that power. What are you going to do with it? Let's go ahead and pray. And as we bow our heads and close our eyes, Jonathan's going to begin playing softly on the piano. And I just wanted to open up the altar to anyone here today. And maybe you are in that grind of life. Maybe you're in that area of preparation and you're going through a time when it kind of feels like right now that maybe you're not really being used for much at all. Maybe you feel like you're not really living your purpose. Maybe you're kind of unhappy or dissatisfied with where you are today. And maybe these little things keep coming up and you're just like, God, where are you right now? Why am I not worthy? Have you not anointed me? Have you not chosen me to do great things for you? I want you to know that God is with you this morning. And I want you to know if you're here, if you're in that place this morning, come and talk with him and say, God, I'm sorry for doubting you, Lord. Continue to prepare me. Continue to give me these opportunities. But if you're over here, particularly more if you're over here, okay, and you're facing a giant right now in your life, something is weighing on you this morning, maybe something that you haven't even been able to tell those sitting around you, right? It's private. It's hurting you, though. And even when I say that, it just kind of knocks at your mind. It's there. It's always with you. It's this giant, and it's taunting you. I want you to know that giant is not what it seems. It is not victorious. So come this morning. Give God the praise for being with you and giving you the strength to face these things and not letting you do it alone. Put your trust in him, put your faith in him, and bring forward the doubt and the fear and everything that comes with it. Just trust him.